Good morning, everyone. Just to briefly remind you of the intent of the outcome area of social inclusion, this is aimed at improving children's lives by addressing poverty and discrimination. And this recognizes that both poverty and discrimination addressing them is both an end in itself and, of course, contributes to all the other results in UNICEF's strategic plan and in the Child Rights Framework. Before getting into the results, and as is done in the report itself, I wanted to just remind us of some of the important developments in 2016 that, of course, affect our work and affect children. Most importantly, the ongoing humanitarian crisis and large-scale displacement has continued. Over the last year, we have seen a tightening of fiscal environments in many countries, including prices of commodities declining. You're on the right one. The World Bank, we have also developed joint extreme poverty numbers with the World Bank, which I wanted to mention. I'll come to that a little bit later. And finally, that the SDG has created opportunities to advance work across the outcome area, with a greater emphasis now on human rights, and most importantly on the inclusion of children within the poverty goal. We wanted to talk what you see in front of you are the impact and outcome indicators, and of course these are at the level for which we hold less direct attribution. We'll get into the more direct levels right away. But I wanted to briefly show these and perhaps to explain the lower levels of achievement on some of them, and to note that to the first one where you see expanded child coverage, that's of social protection. And here you see, in fact, the numbers have continued to go up, but with a bit of a blip along the way, and that has to do with changes in exactly how the data were measured and whether cumulative data was used. There is a similar issue with the indicator on improved capacity to develop and implement and finance social protection systems. So there was a change in the way that we measured it. The data is also, most importantly, year on year rather than cumulative in the way that we're currently reporting it. So it definitely looks less than like what has actually been achieved. But countries were asked whether they'd achieved, whether there had been progress in that particular year. But overall, you can see that perhaps we were ambitious. In some areas we have reached the targets, and in some, of course, there's a long way to go. Let's continue to the next slide. Now, moving to the specific to the specific program areas of social inclusion. The first one on child poverty, we have worked to develop a consistent methodology for addressing child poverty, and a list of indicators which we measure, more than indicators, but of actions which we take at country level to support progress. And here we have seen steady progress, moving from measuring child poverty, whether through monetary or multidimensional means, to having discussions on child poverty, including child poverty in national development plans, in ways and showing results in the policies which are included, and finally having child poverty targets in national plans. The last one, perhaps the number may seem small, but in a way it's less important than, of course, actually making progress in this area. And just to share a couple of examples of our work in child poverty, in addition to the ones you see on the screen in front of you, we had supported our work using thematic funds from our global thematic donation from Norway in Mongolia, where a multiple overlapping deprivation analysis was done, and the data has been used to help set a baseline for the country's monitoring of progress on ending child poverty in all its forms. You'll see later in the presentation what Mongolia has done with that information in terms of expanding its approach to expanding the use of public funds at local level to reach the most marginalized children. Next slide. On social protection, here as well, we have an approach that we're monitoring that in fact is included in the strategic plan outcome, in the results framework, rather, where we are focusing not simply on how many kids are reached, but how well they are reached. Is the increase in social protection coverage actually having an impact on children's well-being? And there are a number of steps which we monitor to show whether that is the case. And here you can see that in fact, not only are numbers of children covered increasing, but the numbers of countries who can demonstrate that increase in social protection is actually making a difference in children's lives also continues to increase. For a few examples of the work on social protection at country level, in addition, I don't want to read to you the ones on the slides, so just to add an additional one that was achieved with the thematic funds, there has been South-South cooperation between Brazil and Nepal, which resulted in the government of Nepal deciding to universalize a child grant and roll it out in additional districts. And we have found that Brazil indeed has been an excellent partner in South-South cooperation around the world. And I also wanted to point out here the increased focus on strengthening social protection for children with disabilities. As you can see, this is happening in many in countries around the world, not just concentrated in the regions you might expect, whereas in CECIS, this has been a focus for many years, but it's great to see this developing in so many other areas. Moving on now to our work on public finance for children. In overall, the overall goal of this work that you see in the target set in the strategic plan is to protect or increase investment. But I'd like to point out here that this is done always with an eye on results. Are the funds actually reaching the poorest children? Are they being equitably spent? Are public funds being used efficiently? That is, are they getting to where they're supposed to be on time? It's one thing to say that you're going to allocate money to a poor district. It's another for the money to actually get there and then be executed on time. Without that, it doesn't make an impact. And indeed, are funds having the intended impact? We're also aware that for all of those things to work right, transparency is critical. And as you can see, the progress is encouraging. Our monitoring is showing that UNICEF support contributed to all of the results that you see here in front of you. To give a specific example, let me come back to Mongolia, where the work of the provincial government in Kufskal province ended up increasing, putting 1.5 million of the local development fund into community kindergartens and providing alternative forms of education. This was efficiently getting funds for quality services to the most marginalized kids. Moving on to the work that we do in governance and decentralization. And this work, actually, we have included in governance and decentralization are several more outlying areas of work around data for urban governance and environment and climate change. So you see all of that here. And we had indeed quite an ambitious target for local participation, and I'm happy to say that despite that level of ambition, there has been steady progress. I guess we see a slight decline in the numbers here, but again, that has to do with the vagaries of annual monitoring of over 140 country offices. And as you can see, the work, the target for work on environment and climate change has indeed been surpassed. One area of work that is also covered here as part of work on governance that we don't have an indicator for, and I wanted to mention, was work with Parliament, because this is quite important. By working with parliaments, UNICEF is able to help government officials put more attention on children, whether it's on child poverty, on public finance, on increasing and expanding the education system. And in Peru, there has been work with a parliamentary subgroup on children, which ended up resulting in a considerable increase in resource allocation for children. One more fact you'll find in the report itself on the work on climate change is that new countries are now engaged in the issue, including, quite importantly, both China and India are involving children in their work on climate change. A few more specific examples here on the work on decentralization and local governance. You can see them on your screen, and for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. Another area of our work, another program area of the work, is human rights, non-discrimination, and participation. And here we're looking to increase not only ratification of key documents, but also the use of ombudspersons' offices and their involvement, as well as work on reporting on adolescent engagement. It also includes work that's harder to measure on countering discrimination against marginalized groups by other children, by parents, by community groups, and by national leaders. We've seen some quite exciting progress here. I wanted to point out these two examples. In Sri Lanka, the final proposal of the constitution that's currently under review reflects specific provisions on child rights. Seeing child rights specifically reflected in constitutions is a great gain. And in Mozambique, a great improvement in social acceptance of children with disabilities, a really major hurdle to overcome to inclusion for children everywhere. The final program area is social inclusion in humanitarian contexts. And this includes quite a few areas of work, both around the expansion of social protection in humanitarian contexts, the readiness, disaster risk reduction with local authorities, peace building efforts with young people to reduce conflict as well. And here we're seeing steady progress as well, as you can see from the reports. Some specific work that's been going on. I guess Nepal has featured quite frequently in these reports. But let me mention in particular Turkey, where of course there has been a massive influx of Syrian refugees, and the efforts to include children within the social protection system of Turkey. There are separate refugee programs, but there is also an effort which UNICEF is supporting, which is helping children go to Turkish schools, and that support using cash transfer program, which has been which already exists for children in Turkey. So it's essentially the same program extended to refugees, has taken off in the last year. Moving to our future work plan, there were a couple of things that I wanted to point out. One important achievement and way forward in the past year has been our collaboration with the End Child Poverty Coalition, which was co-founded by UNICEF and Save the Children, and together we have published a guide for practical implementation of SDG 1 for children. We are working, maybe now looking, the second document that you see in front of you. I have the pointer, but so thank you very much, Hannah. So the second one doesn't exist yet, but is very much under development. We are looking, the work that we do on public finance, on increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of public spending, of course, is often spearheaded by social policy colleagues around the world who work with ministries of finance. But the work but this work also includes working with sectors, with our sector specialists around UNICEF, and this framework helps bring together those approaches to have one approach to increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of public expenditure. you can see on the last part of the screen the next strategic plan, the outcomes, the proposed results of the next strategic plan, and of course working for smooth transition to this plan, which will be both across goals in 4 and 5. You will see aspects of the social inclusion agenda from the current strategic plan. As well as in the cross-cutting strategy on leveraging domestic resources, which that public finance for children framework will help us to operationalize. I think a last point I want to make about our future work plan is around social protection in emergencies. This has become an increasing focus with the focus of the World Humanitarian Summit, an agreement not only to expand cash in emergencies, but to use social protection systems more broadly. And indeed, with probably many of the governments represented here in the room, with the EU and Germany and others, we're working on a conference to bring together lessons learned on this area, which will take place later this year. The global partnerships I've mostly mentioned already, so we'll just flash those up there. On our resources, as you can see, we have not quite met our planned resources. It doesn't appear that we will get there by the end of next year, and of course that causes us some challenges for achieving the results that we hope to. But as in the past, and as I reported last year, regular resources continue to be an important and main source of funding. Those are simply not sufficient to fund everything that we need, and so an increase in thematic funding would really help us to achieve our goals. As you could see from the previous slides, we've achieved quite a lot with thematic funding in the past. And with that, it remains for me just to thank you, to thank all of you because of those, keeping in mind not only the regular resource allocations that many provide, but the cooperation we have on the ground with many, many governments in these areas, and to give my specific thanks to the governments of Norway and Sweden for their thematic support, as well as our top resource partners, the European Union, the governments of Germany, Canada, and Italy, and the Dutch Committee for UNICEF. Thank you very much.